welcome to part one of 6 ways to build a sus chord. The little intro you just heard used a few different type of sus chords, and maybe we'll touch on those later. There are a lot of different roads that can lead to a sus4, and in this session I'd like to demo 3 of the ways out of the 6 that we'll be talking about, coming at it from different angles. And you're going to see them notated in music in all kinds of ways. There are not really as many standards as we would like, just as in all chord notation. So what is a sus chord anyway? Well, in order to get into this, we'll be using various numbers. Basically, there are 2 sets of numbers we use. In chord progressions, typically you see them written and analyzed in Roman numerals. So for example, D, let's call that 1. The 4 would be G. The 5 would be A. And back to the 1. Okay, the very basic of all music progressions, 1, 4, 5, 1. Now, the other set of numbers have to do with the chord that we're dealing with in the moment. Let's take this A chord, which is the 5 chord of the progression, and we're going to assume a lot of these sus chords are more or less built around the 5 chord. Let's call the A of that 1, okay? And that's going to be the root of the chord. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, okay? In this case, we're going to have a flatted 7th to build our chord. We're dealing either with a major, altering the 3rd to a sus, or we're dealing with a 7th chord, altering the 3rd to a sus, okay? Let me stop for a minute and tune here. This is real exciting. Basically, sus is short for suspended. So you're taking the 3rd note of the chord, 1, 2, 3, that's C sharp. Let's play it up here. Here's your A. We take the 3rd note and we replace it or suspend the 4th note above it. And what it does is to delay that resolution. We talked about sus chords, and they could either be a sus2 or a sus4. And that is by using the neighboring tones around the 3rd of the 4th or the 2nd. A major, A sus, and A2 or A sus2 more correctly. But in this little session, we're going to talk about the sus4, and we're also going to be covering the dominant chords. So if we had an A7, here's the 3rd, here's the 4th. Very typical way of creating a 7th chord with a sus4 in a bar position. And now you're going to see the 7th chords written either as an A7 sus4 in sheet music, or you might see just an A7 sus or an A sus7. So there's no real standard way, unfortunately. Now, without the 3rd in the chord, it gets a little ambiguous. It actually could be a minor or major. So, and you stuck this on top of it, it would fit. But that's another story for another day. Now we're getting into minor 11 chords. As I mentioned, the sus chord often is used on the 5 of a progression, but not always the case. You can find it anywhere. It'll pop up all over the place. And in fact, some compositions are written entirely of sus chords, such as Herbie Hancock's Maiden Voyage. So check that out when you get a chance. Also, you can find a sus chord used as a prolonged section just to build tension. You could even vamp on that. And a great example of that, going back, is Steely Dan's Asia. At the end of Asia, Steve Gadd takes an amazing drum solo over a vamp of a sus chord. Okay, so the number 1 method of building a sus chord is, as I've already alluded to, you have a major chord, a triad in any, however you like to play it. Now, you take the third chord, raise the fourth above it. Those are some of the more typical voicings that you'd find. Now, just a note here, I picked A and I'm droning an A under it. It might get a little tiring on your ear. Any of these voicings can be done as movable voicings, but I'm keeping an open A under them. On to number 2. The number 2 method would be to play a major chord a fourth above the root. So again, if we're talking about A, the fourth of A, 1, 2, 3, 4, is D. So play a D over the A. And it has the effect of a sus chord. It's very subtle. It's very subtle, and it doesn't really offer the strong resolution back to a 1 that a typical sus chord would. And that's because you've got all the notes of the D chord in it already. It's notated D/A. Okay, so that's a little bit about the slash chords. We'll be getting really more heavily into slash chords and all the great things you can do with that in another session. Now, on to the third method, which would be to stack the notes in fourths to make the voicing. So, in other words, if you had an A chord, A, D, and G are fourths above it. Now that sounds pretty muddy down there, but not bad up the octave. If you were to take the voicing here and move it up, we have a little tiny sus7 chord, again off the A. And this is a nice form because if you come up here, now you have a sus2, but this is a good form to move around with because you can not only stack fourths, but you can put a third on top of that. When I say a third, I'm talking about an interval from the last one we left off at. So instead of the G, you could put the F sharp on top there, and it's creating another tension over the A chord. You could put the A on top. Then with this voicing, you can move it all around. Creating a variety of sus type sounds. I did go out of the sus chord here and there, but try to grab a hold of a few forms that work for you. We're going to cover 3 more in the next session and see if you can come up with your own voicings that sound great to you and that will fit and complement whatever song you're working with or whatever song you're writing. I will see you in the next session, which is part 2 of the 6 ways to build a sus chord. Until then, ciao.